You know Odysseus, right? The legendary hero of the Trojan War, the guy who came up with the Trojan horse. But his 10-year trip home, that was an epic in itself. And believe it or not, it all started with a really brutal, really costly mistake. So let's talk about that very first stop after Troy, a place called Ismarus, and the absolute disaster of the raid on the Cicones.
Okay, so picture this. You've just spent a decade fighting and you finally conquered the city of Troy. You're a hero, you're heading home with your crew. What's next? You'd think it'd be smooth sailing, right? A straight shot home? Well, for Odysseus, the journey home turned into a whole other kind of war. And that very first battle, it came from somewhere he probably never expected, from inside his own ranks.
So fresh off their massive victory, Odysseus and his 12 ships get blown off course. And they don't land somewhere friendly. Nope, they're swept to the shores of Ismarus, the city of the Cicones. Now, what's so important about that is that the Cicones were actually allies of Troy. So for these Greek warriors who are riding high on their victory, this isn't just a pit stop, it's enemy territory. And the raid itself? It was fast, and it was vicious. According to Odysseus himself, they sacked the city, killed the men, and then divided up all the treasure and the Ciconian women among the crew. It was a total blowout. I mean, coming off the high of taking down Troy, this easy win must have made them feel completely invincible. But that feeling, that overconfidence, that's exactly what set them up for disaster. And this, right here, is where a simple raid turns into a massive lesson about human nature. The real fight isn't between the Greeks and the Cicones anymore. It's between Odysseus, the smart commander, and his own men, who are just completely blinded by their greed. So here's the turning point. Odysseus, who's always thinking 10 steps ahead, he sees the danger. They won, they got their loot, and the smart move is to get out of there before the Cicones can regroup. He gives the order, let's go now, but his men, they've got other plans. They decide it's time to party, right there on the beach, feasting on stolen cattle and drinking barrel after barrel of wine. Odysseus flat out calls them fools, and he wasn't wrong. This moment where they just openly defy him isn't just bad discipline, it's a fatal mistake. Their total lack of self-control, their inability to think past the immediate pleasure of food and wine, ends up sealing the fate for so many of their friends. And you know what? This becomes a pattern we see again and again. The crew's own weaknesses lead to their doom. So while Odysseus's crew is having this big party on the beach, they're giving the Cicones the one thing they desperately need: time. While the Greeks are getting drunk and disorganized, the survivors of the raid are running for help. And the backup they call in, these aren't just more of the same guys. The Cicones who lived further inland were a much bigger threat. We're talking more soldiers who were stronger and way more skilled in fighting. They could fight from chariots or on foot. The Greeks had just rolled over a coastal town. Now they were about to face a real army. Homer uses this beautiful but honestly terrifying image to describe the counterattack. The Ciconian army comes down on that beach as thick as leaves and bloom in summer. Just try to imagine that. The Greeks, probably hungover, totally unprepared, waking up to see an endless wave of soldiers charging at them. The tables had completely turned. What started as this drunken celebration suddenly becomes a bloody, desperate fight for their lives. The Greeks, who were conquerors just a few hours ago, are now trapped with their backs to the sea, just trying to survive. And the cost for their foolishness was absolutely devastating. 6 men. And that's not 6 men total. That's 6 well-armed fighters lost from every single one of Odysseus's 12 ships. That's 72 men dead. This wasn't just a little skirmish. It was a huge blow to their forces, all because his crew refused to listen. The survivors get pushed back to their ships and barely escape with their lives. But even in this moment of defeat, you get a glimpse of Odysseus's leadership. He refuses to just sail away. He insists they perform a ritual of mourning, not leaving until they've cried out 3 times for each man they lost. It's this really solemn moment that both honors the dead and, unfortunately, sets this tone of loss that's going to follow them for the rest of their journey. But there's this really fascinating little detail hidden in the middle of all this violence. Amidst the brutal sacking of the city, Odysseus did something really smart, an act of reverence that ends up having huge consequences down the line. And the answer is, yeah, actually, he did. While his men were on a rampage, Odysseus made a point to protect one specific person and his family, a man named Maron, who was a priest of the god Apollo. This choice shows us a totally different side of Odysseus.
He's not just a warrior. He's a man who understands piety and the unspoken rules of civilization. Now, to really get why this matters, you have to understand this idea of xenia, or guest friendship. In the ancient world, this wasn't just about being a polite host. It was a sacred duty, a serious code of conduct. How you treated a stranger, someone far from home, was a measure of your worth as a person. It was a system protected by Zeus himself, and it could literally be the difference between life and death. And because Odysseus showed Maron respect, Maron returned the favor with Xenia, giving Odysseus these incredible gifts. I mean, look at this. Gold, a solid silver mixing bowl, but pay close attention to that last one. 12 jars of a sweet, super potent, divine wine. This stuff is special. And this gift, this wine, is going to be the exact thing that saves Odysseus and his men from the Cyclops Polyphemus later on. So what's the big takeaway from this bloody first stop? Well, it's a pretty harsh lesson. Sometimes the biggest dangers aren't monsters or angry gods, but the weaknesses you have within your own crew. This isn't just their first mistake. It's basically the blueprint for almost every bad thing that happens to them later. That inability to resist temptation becomes the fatal flaw that defines their whole journey. Because the raid on the Cicones is the perfect preview of the crew's self-destruction. This exact same toxic mix of greed and terrible discipline is what leads them to open the bag of winds, and most tragically, to slaughter the sacred cattle of the sun god. Ismarus isn't just chapter 1 of their journey. It's the cautionary tale that explains exactly why, in the end, Odysseus is the only one who ever makes it home.